Hello, from the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs, it's Mark and Carrie.
Indeed it is. It's Mark and Carrie does the news with the sort of weird new intro that they made us do. But that's okay. So, the World Cup. Hello.
Yeah, I'm assuming you watched.
Oh yeah, it was really. We talked about this on the last pod.
Yeah.
I felt totally conflicted, and then I realised that hypocrisy was the way to resolve the contradiction.
Yes, totally.
And I happily resolved it through hypocrisy, as everybody else did. It's kind of worked out pretty well for Qatar. The way you saw this at the end, you saw the game. Did you watch the presentation ceremony afterwards?
I watched a little bit of it, but I just have to say, as someone who knows zero about soccer, international soccer, really anything, I mean, I call it soccer, I was really enthralled with it. It was super exciting. Again, I think that like Pele still plays for, I don't know for even what country, but he's the only soccer person I even know. So I thought it was really an exciting game from a total.
Yeah, it was an incredible game. But what was also incredible was watching the presentation scene afterwards. So three things happened in a row. The
Yeah.
first one is you get this canonization of Messi, right? I mean, literally the sort of the ruler of Qatar or his underling puts this giant cape around him, right? Which is just
Oh,
weird.
geez.
And then you had you had this brilliant moment where they have the golden glove, which is the goalie of the tournament, and they give that to the Argentine guy, who
Yeah.
then proceeded to turn his giant hand prize into a kind of like phallic gesture towards the entire stadium, which was a wonderful way of summing up both sides of the World Cup in that regard. And then there was the weird sight of like Emmanuel Macron, who turns out to be only about 2 inches taller than Messi. That was the best. That was my revelation. I was like, holy crap, he's really short. He's hugging Mbappe as he's going past it, and Mbappe, it's just pure like sort of like I'm consoling Mbappe, and it's just like you're so ingratiating yourself for like a publicity shot. It's ridiculous, right? And Mbappe didn't look into his eyes once,
Oh,
right? He
really?
just
Wow.
stared right ahead, right? So then you get this brilliant sort of shot at the end where you've got Messi on one side and Mbappe on the other side,
Yeah.
and then some dude from FIFA. And you think about, well, Qatar, what has Qatar got here? Well, Qatar got to sports wash its way through one of the greatest World Cups ever.
Yeah.
The whole sort of like controversy over, the workers and so on and so forth really got shoved into touch. And they managed to squash that battle. And what you're looking at when you look at this scene is the triumph of Qatar, and I'll explain why. Both Messi and Mbappe play for the same team in Paris Saint-Germain, which is owned by the Qatari Sports Authority.
Oh, geez. Wow.
So they set up the Battle of the Titans that they both own.
Yeah. Wow.
It was like, wow, that was pretty amazing. So it's not that kind of took the shine off it. I don't want to go on that kind of moral high ground because, of course, I have no moral high ground at this point. We've established this. But it was this moment of like, woo, global capitalism in sports. What a marriage.
Well, and I was watching Fox Sports because
Oh, you poor thing. I was literally stealing the British commentary off of the internet and then playing the Spanish feed.
Oh, interesting. So you were getting even less of the sports washing because the Fox commentators, and there's an article in the paper about this as well, were going on about how it was like the best put on World Cup, because of course Murdoch owns Fox News. Right. So it was just like basically Qatar should host it for the rest of time. And these wonderful leaders, like hasn't it been like the best?
The authoritarians we like, yes.
Yes. Excellent. Oh, and it's been so well organized, and look at all the fans that are there, and it's just so incredible. So I thought that was interesting. Back to the trophy with the golden, that trophy needs to be redesigned because that whole
that's just asking for it.
Bizarre.
It's totally asking for it. I mean, there's so many wrong things you could do with a giant golden hand. I mean, where do you even begin?
Yes. On a different thought, I was struck that I'm curious what your perspective on this is that it looked to me that the entire French team is black.
Well, no, they're not. For a start, no, that's not true.
Or is it the starter? I mean, it looked like, or the majority.
Yeah, I mean, the majority on the field, but I mean, that's sort of, this is what's happened across loads of European teams, is you're drawing, soccer traditionally draws from, if you will, the poorer strata of society. Yeah. And as that poorer strata of society becomes more and more immigrant-based, right? When you think about who you're going to get coming through that talent pool. So if you think about England, right, you got Harry Kane, but you've already got Bukayo Saka, right, who's there. So I think this is something that's not unique to France. It is this kind of drawing from a more diverse pool at the
Yeah.
bottom, and it's one of the real virtues of soccer. If you think about it, we're in a game whereby elite institutions respond to the events of 2020 by realizing that they need to do more on diversity and inclusion. Fair is fair, and they try and actively do that. Soccer doesn't need to do that. Because
Yeah.
in a sense,
Yeah.
what it's doing is it's pooling from a very diverse pool because that happens to be the people at the bottom. And the
Yeah.
way that you succeed is you basically have a career in soccer.
Yeah.
So there's a really interesting socioeconomic story in that observation, I think.
Well, and that the Argentinian team has more homegrown talent. Is that fair statement or no? I mean,
Well, they're
that,
all homegrown. They need to be, citizens to some degree or shape or form. It's just that Argentina, unlike Brazil, was primarily a 19th century European settler society,
yeah,
as
right.
opposed to having that longer history, one which included a history of slavery, which is
Yeah,
what you get in Brazil. So Brazil's far more ethnically mixed because of that,
right.
which is
Right.
one of the reasons that, like, basically the Argentinians bug the rest of Latin America because they think that they're actually different from the rest of Latin America. And in a way, their lineage, etc., really is. They regard themselves as the Europeans that eat steak 3 times a day.
Right. That's right. Right. Because Buenos Aires is like the Paris of South America.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the shots of all the Argentines in the main sort of drag down there. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, it
Yeah.
just at first I've never visited and I've always wanted to, but it does look like a pretty amazing city.
Yeah. Well, I've been there a couple times, and the one thing I'll say is that when you fly in, you land and you feel like you're in Cranston, Rhode Island, only because there's like a Walmart and there's like just several American chain stores, and you're like, oh shucks, I just
Uh,
flew all this way, and there's like a Walmart. But um, did you also see who else was in attendance at the World Cup game in one of the boxes? I'm sure you saw this.
what was that?
Elon with Jared Kushner.
Elon and Kushner were there?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought he was too busy screwing up Twitter.
I know, right? He was, well, he can do both maybe at the same time.
Well, obviously he can. I mean, it is one of those things where is there a kind of curse of success here? And so I've spoken before about the billionaire curse, which is you have no margin for failure because you've always got a big cushion of money to fall on. So there's part of that. And although he's now being sued by Tesla stockholders because
Oh,
they're undervalued. Basically, you're causing a collapse in the value of Tesla because you're dumping so many on the market to fund your self-destruction of Twitter, right? Now, this is a guy that made space rockets profitable. This is a guy that basically said, I'm going to do electric cars, and everybody laughed at him, and he still got the best brand and the best mark. So there is an idea that sort of, he is the genius that can do something with Twitter that nobody else can. But it could also just be an astonishing act of hubris that he has no idea what he's doing and he's literally about to burn through 40 billion in cash.
so there's a theory out there that he is trying to devalue, or this is how I understand it, make it so Twitter is worth a lot less so he can cut his losses on this and essentially make it so the money that he owes to the banks, as opposed, they'll take like 10 cents to the dollar as opposed to like 5 cents to the dollar or something on the debt. Does that make any sense
Hmm.
to you? Or is it just, I mean, is that part of that like evil genius thing? He's trying to drive it into the ground so that he doesn't owe as much money on it.
It doesn't strike me he's the type of guy that engages in voluntary bankruptcies.
I see.
I
Okay.
no. I mean, he's gonna try and do something with this, whether he knows what he's doing or that, I don't know. I mean, the stuff he's been pulling with Twitter, I mean, banning journalists, about doxing people who, people who give real-time locations. In other words, him and people like him.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. It's very much in flux. I mean, I'm still using it because, as we've established, I'm a hypocrite. But I gotta say, and this is a common thing that I've seen, I'm using it less.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of like I don't go at myself. Oh, I'll go on Twitter now, right? It just doesn't happen anymore. If I have something to post out that I think people are interested in, I'll send it out. But I
Mhm.
don't feel like engaging with the platform anymore. It's got a sort of malodor about the whole thing now.
Are you looking at any different ones, or you're just in a
Oh,
holding
the
place?
thought of the thought of sort of like transferring everything and doing. I want to spend less time doing this. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe if it is a
Right.
catastrophic blow up, right? Maybe this is just an opportunity for all of us to remember that Twitter isn't real,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? That the metaverse doesn't exist. That like there are real people out there with real issues and real things, and maybe we can engage with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. Speaking of real things, since we last spoke, Sam Friedman Bank Friedman was
Yes,
arrested in the Bahamas.
I know.
Um, I mean, so much for, MIT, Stanford law parents, all of that. I mean, even they can be arrested.
Well, apparently the both sets of parents, him and his erstwhile girlfriend, sometimes squeeze in the penthouse, which was a big orgy fest, apparently modelled on an imperial Chinese harem.
Oy.
Yeah, there's an article about this.
I mean, that
It's
is
pretty mental.
talk
Yeah,
about
I know.
stereotype.
I know. It's just like it's all so wrong. What is it
Yeah.
about super rich people that they all become not just racist, they become biological racists?
Yes.
Right? They start to get fascinated by things like, the Hindus and stuff. You're like, where are you going with this?
It's
It's totally
happening,
mad.
right?
I know. Anyway, so yes, so apparently both sets of parents have now voluntarily retired. In other words, they're getting out of town. And yes, their progeny have been exposed as essentially giant fraudsters who had no idea what they were doing, taking people's money and just burning it. Seems to be the case.
Well,
Pretty
and I
crazy.
had heard something on a podcast somewhere that the girlfriend is now getting her own legal representation. And, of course,
Oh, I'm sure she is.
right? Yeah, I'm gonna pretend
Yeah.
I'm looking out for number one here. Yeah.
Well, I mean, think about it now, because the dam is burst, right? I mean, I always look back upon prior episodes of financial shenanigans. And the weird thing about 2008 was because it was so big, there was no one person you could kind of pin it on and, become the poster child for it.
Yeah.
And once one goes, the other ones go. So you go back to savings and loans crisis, right? People don't know this. 5,000 bank executives and savings and loans executives went to jail because of that.
Wow. I
5,000,
did not,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, 2008, none, right? Maybe one bloke from Goldman who wrote stupid
Right.
emails, right?
Yep.
If you go back to the dot-com bust, it's fascinating. Who was the person who went to jail that allowed everyone to say, that's it, we've dealt with it, it's all over? Do you remember who that was?
No, I don't. I can only think of Martha Stewart in Insider
That's
Trading.
it.
Oh, is
That's
it
it.
Martha? Okay.
It was Martha Stewart. That's it. She was the poster child of like going. Now, and we thought that the poster child was going to be Elizabeth Holmes.
Right.
Right? I mean, she has
Yep.
gone down for some serious time, right? But now they've got an opportunity to really get a group and just
Yeah.
go, this is what happens if you play with fire. So I think these prosecutions are going to be extremely serious.
Yeah. I was thinking about the FTX stuff in relation to is Lena Khan in charge of the SEC?
Yeah. No, not the SEC. Well, no, she's more on the monopoly side of it. But yeah, she's not in
Okay,
charge.
okay, so she would not be the one pursuing these. But I was thinking about this in relation to the midterm elections, and especially in what is this something about the Biden administration? Oh, it'd be the DOJ, right? Going after and trying to make some sort of statement about this type of behavior and trying to set the stage that at least from the Biden DOJ, they're not going to accept this type of behavior. I don't know that it actually is that. That was the thought that I had in my head last night before I went to sleep. But I did have a couple of things I wanted to say about wrap up for the midterm elections that I didn't say last time. And that is
let me give you an intro for that, right? Because
thank
we're a
you.
bit jumping around.
I needed
right?
help. I needed some help.
We'll cut in at this point and go that. All right, so anyway, that's all the fun about orgies and hierarchy and Chinese harems. Let's talk about something pure, politics. What happened with those midterms that were super important that we've all forgotten about?
Well, yeah, there was an election 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago that we've all forgotten about, and that is Raphael Warnock won the Senate seat in Georgia against Herschel Walker. So that means that the Democrats have the Senate 51-49. The House was finally settled. Those two last races hanging out there settled. So the House is going to be Republican 222 to 213, so just a 9-seat advantage in the House. And then right after Warnock wins, Kristen Sinema, the senator from Arizona, decides that she's going to be independent. I didn't read any of the behind the scenes accounts, but you'd have to think this was clearly orchestrated, that if this happens and this happens, though, when maybe she just decides to go her own way and do her own thing. But I do kind of wonder.
Could it be as simple as she just doesn't want to face a primary?
Well, yeah. Because I think she was going to, if she was Democrat, yeah.
Right, exactly, because they really didn't like her, and her own staff was leaving in droves. So you just hold on to the asset as long as you can. I mean,
yeah.
I love the joke that said when Kirsten Sinema announced that she was going independent, most Democrats were shocked to find out she was meant to be a Democrat.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I do wonder if Manchin's next, but then I think I don't know if he goes independent, does that help? I mean, to your point, is there any political advantage that he
Right,
gets
nobody's
from
going to primary him
doing
down
that?
there. He's
Yeah,
fine, right? So he's
yeah,
not facing that one. But
yeah,
yeah, so we're back to basically almost the same kind of equilibrium we had before, with a switch in the house that's very narrow.
yeah.
But you're still, I mean, you tell me, are we going to now get everybody jumping in and saying, and now we need to do Hunter Biden Volume 7? Is that going to be what they're going to be occupied with next year?
Yes, and I think it will be Biden will be impeached in the House. I mean, it won't go anywhere in the Senate, but I think that's the number one thing on the Republicans to-do list. Um,
And what would be the grounds for impeachment?
Unclear. We talked about this, maybe something Ukraine. I don't know how will they try to wrap in Hunter Biden's laptop?
Yeah, they'll have to have
Unclear.
something. I mean, there has to be some
Yeah,
kind of gun that may have originally had some smoke in it, because
yeah.
basically, we don't like you and we didn't win as much as we wanted seems to be a pretty weak read to run that one on.
Correct. And yeah, I mean, but here's the thing that I do wonder after, the bloodbath of deciding who the Speaker of the House is going to be and whether Kevin McCarthy is going to win, is that if in fact they do go in that way, I mean, it's a total misread of this election. I don't know if any of the true believers on the Republican side really care about that, but it does
Mm.
seem like the voters are saying we just want to move on from this and we actually care about, the kitchen table types of issues.
So here's a question for you then, Carrie. This week, Trump issued, and they all sold out, superhero figurines or trading cards or whatever. And, he made quite a bit of cash off that. He's still immensely popular with the base, but it seems that the party is no longer fully in lockstep behind him. Where do you think this is going? Is he kind of like stale at this point? Is it, or is it just a question of he just needs to wait until it gets close to election time and ramp it up and they'll all just fall on top of him again?
Well, I think it's a little bit like relevancy. So to stay relevant, like Elon, right? I mean, I think part of Elon's saying he has to stay in this conversation, keep doing crazy stuff just to stay at the top of the conversation. And I think Trump has to maintain that relevancy in whatever way he can. But the other thing is that I think big donors have left Trump and are like, we don't
Mm,
want to do this anymore. Ron DeSantis or whoever seems reasonable to us. And so he's losing some of those big donors. I mean, we talked about this last podcast about the Murdoch family, saying
yeah,
that they're not supporting him anymore. So I mean, Trump will always get, he's got to do a big rally. He's got to get a big crowd. But I mean, once the donors leave, you wonder how he can maintain his relevancy unless, I mean, he
right.
kind of has to keep doing the crazy stuff like Elon.
And also, what he had last time was he had that shock value of saying things that nobody else was saying. That was kind of obvious, like
Yeah.
you shipped your entire industrial base to China, and now they're screwing you back. What do you expect, right? People care about immigration. I'm willing to talk about it. Nobody else is, right? And that was his real strength, was the ability to basically, in a sense, walk into a coalition that had already been formed, identify with that, and then just walk out with the support. It's not, the world moves on. It's not clear that that works the same way. Coming back and just going, China,
Yes.
China
Yep.
again, right? I
Yep.
mean, is that really going to do it this time? Is he capable of a reinvention?
Yes. And can looking backward, the 2020 election, exactly to what you just said, does that have any power? I don't think people want to look forward. They're like, okay, 2020, sorry, sour grapes. Like, I'm not sure that that's a particularly powerful message.
Yeah, fair, exactly. So, other things thinking about this year in review, it's not been a great year for authoritarians in general. A quick tour de globe.
Yeah.
China,
Yeah.
well, it turns out that, like, you can piss off the Chinese people enough that they'll even rebel against Xi
Yeah.
and
Yep.
surveillance communism. They've eased the COVID lockdowns, And then, of course, because the vaccination rates are lower, particularly amongst older people, you're now beginning to get spikes in the cities, and it's not
Yeah.
clear what they do. I mean, going forward, given the fact that so much stuff is made in China, this is just a continuing nightmare for supply chains.
Yeah.
So this, has implications. But just in terms of the authoritarian stuff, it's like, these guys were great, they could do no wrong, whatever, right? Well, he seems to have screwed that one up. Iran is just
Hmm.
a horror show. I
Yeah.
mean, public executions of protesters, top actors being arrested for suggesting support on social media. This is a deeply unpopular regime that's kind of fighting for its existence.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for the Revolutionary Guard, they would be very much, in trouble. And then it's interesting with Russia, you've got notions of a possible winter offensive, which is historically not what anybody ever does when you're fighting in Russia.
Yeah.
Possible rumors of Belarus coming in from the north, all this sort of stuff. But there's also rumors that the elites are finally turning against him, that he might be pensioned off to Venezuela or one of these places,
That's
right? So it's a
interesting.
very
Yeah.
mixed set of signals, but overall, bit of a shitty year if you're an authoritarian, person relying on a combination of personal charisma and violence.
That would be a great perfume or fragrance to put to put out there as a holiday gift. It shows that they have weak spots. They're not, you can be the strong person, but you actually do have there is a soft underbelly somewhere. And especially thinking about Xi, that they gave in kind of fast too. I mean, gave in meaning like the ending the lockdowns. Like I thought it was going to be much more strong man behavior, keep it as it is, and then maybe loosen things up. But I thought that they would. I didn't think that they would move as quickly as that. I don't know that there's a lot of holiday cheer in what was just said, because I mean, I guess I'm always worried that there's some weakness, but then they come back even stronger, on somebody's back.
I kind of think that, it's not to say that the populist moment has passed. I mean, far from it.
Yeah.
I can imagine if I was French and I was watching Macron basically hang out in Qatar and embrace Mbappe and sort of like try and be the man of the people thing, knowing that basically you had this huge conflict just recently with the Yellow Jackets, and you had this whole thing called the Grand Debate, and you were meant to listen to them, whatever. And essentially what it is just the same technocrats basically saying, oh, we're listening, now please go home, right? So, but there's another side to this, which I think these regimes are showing, is like you can go well beyond populism to full-blown authoritarianism, and people hate that too.
Yeah.
Right, that's not popular. It's not as if sort of the weaknesses of democracy are corrected by a certain amount of populism and it maintains it, right? If it falls all the way over, as China went from basically a very soft authoritarian, quite open, quite pluralistic society into the much harder version, it turns out people like that even less than a shitty democracy.
Yeah, and that people actually will move against it, and even at the risk of their own lives, actually protest.
Yeah.
There's only so much humans can take in terms of that. Yeah, I agree.
And, and the people, unarmed protesters in Iran in particular, I mean, being targeted,
Yeah.
women being shot in the face and all this sort of stuff by the security forces, and yet they're still coming out. I mean, it's just incredible bravery.
Well, and I thought maybe we already talked about this, or I talked about it in my head, that after Iran lost to the US, that people in Tehran were honking and like, because showing that they thought the team was an arm of the government. And so,
right,
I mean, just another illustration of the people hating their government.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one to think for as we go through 23. You know what happens on these ones? Because this was kind of the new axis of, if not evil, then at least difference. And now it seems that you've got Iran full-throated support with drones and supplies for Russia.
Yeah.
China is basically saying to the Saudis, why don't you allow us to pay for oil in our currency rather than dollars? They're definitely trying to, find their groove, find more expansion. But it's a question of, who wants to be in bed with that troika?
I know.
I mean, it's just like, this is like three rotten regimes. Do you really want to be the ones that are siding with them? I suppose for some cheap oil you'll do it, but it's an interesting one with the Saudis, though. I mean, they really are playing with fire. Everything is contingent upon the US security guarantee, and they pretty much think they don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
And now they don't care about the US, and it's like, well, we'll see how far that one goes.
Would you travel to Saudi Arabia? They're doing the big push for tourism. and they have all the ads in the glossy travel magazines.
I'm obviously not looking at the right glossy travel magazines. Um, it's not that, I don't want to say I don't like a country, I don't want to go to a place or
Yeah,
whatever, but I just can't imagine what possible things would bring me there if it
yeah,
wasn't just a giant bag of cash,
yeah, yeah.
right? And even then, maybe I do have some morals after all. Like, there's probably limits on that one as well.
Well, and I was just thinking of like, they have, the Petra stuff spread into Saudi Arabia. So there, there's cultural stuff. But as a woman traveling there, can I go there? Like, would there be so many constraints on what I could do or not do? And it just seems like beyond the obvious, that it would just seems like it would be kind of like not so much fun. Speaking of not so much fun, I had thinking about what the Fed did in terms of interest rates, I had some questions for you because I did a quick scan of the front page of the FT a couple days ago, and I was like, "Oh, this is good stuff to ask Blythe." What do you think is happening with emerging markets and the defaults? And isn't the big one? I mean, people are worried about Turkey. That's a question.
Hmm. Yeah, they're worried about Turkey. They're worried about a bunch of smaller ones as well. El Salvador, places like this. It went from basically there was two countries that were possibly on the verge of like downgrade to default level. Now there's about 13,
Gee.
right? So it's a real thing, right? Now we've spoken about this many times. It's dead obvious, right? You push interest rates here in 2009, 2010 down to zero, then people looking to make money will push it somewhere where you get a higher return. So the money flows out of the US and flows into everywhere else. And if you continue to raise interest rates in the United States, what you're saying is you can get a risk-free rate of 5%, 6%, whatever, right? Why would I have my money in Turkey when I can get 6% for showing up in Citibank, right? So all the money flows out, and then you start to get currency crises. The currency devalues. They've got dollar-denominated debts, and that's when you get the insolvency problem, right? So it's pretty straightforward. Now, the good news is the Fed know this. They're not going to talk about it in public, but they absolutely know this. And this is why, Powell talks a really, really big game and then does a half a point raise. It's almost to say, you thought we were going to be soft, but we're not going to be soft. The federal funds rate, I mean, I didn't check it this morning. What is it, 4.5, 4.75?
Yeah.
We still haven't hit 5%. If inflation is still 7.9%, you've still got a negative real rate. Right. So, it's one of those things where it's like there's a bark and there's a bite, and they're trying to calibrate both. But the what they don't want is a set of cascading sovereign defaults across all major debt markets,
Right.
and capital flight out of these countries. So I think that's ultimately the constraint on the Fed raising rates. Now, there's another problem for them, though, which they're beginning to figure out is two things. A lot of the sort of non-volatile stuff that may come back, like supply chain related, fuel related, etc., right? It turns out that we are effectively deglobalizing, right? We are friend shoring, we're going to do all this stuff, right? And we're doing this with a much smaller labor market than we thought we had. In part because the boomers are retiring, in part because 1 million people died because of COVID, in part because long COVID has taken 500,000 people out of the US labor market by some estimates, etc., right? So you've got tight labor markets. As a consequence, you're seeing unionization efforts, you're seeing wages rising, right? And all of which, in a sense, I applaud because they've been ridiculously low and all the returns have gone to capital for far too long. But the Fed, being the Fed, has to look at that and say, that could be persistent inflation. Now, does that mean that you end up with positive real rates, right, all the time? Well, we have to go back before 2008. We have to go back to the 1990s, right? I mean, go back to the 1980s. We used to we had a pretty reasonable economy when interest rates were always between 6 and 4%. We've completely forgotten that.
Right.
We think that like free money is normal, but what free money did was it gave us FTX. It gave us NFTs. It gave us SPACs. It gave us massive distortion of investment and utter nonsense. So in a sense, I'm trying to get my head for 23 and going forward on the world having, at least the United States having, positive growth, but positive real rates and actual real inflation baked into the cake, which bespeaks a rather different type of economy going forward over the long term.
So it would mean possibly that my house that was going to be worth, like, I bought it for $1 and now it's going to be worth like $3 trillion tomorrow. Like that sort of, and like a stock market that's just like up, up, up. That stuff is maybe something in
Yeah,
the past.
it might actually sort of, mean revert to more normal returns.
Yeah.
Because if you can't basically just constantly refi your house,
Yeah.
take out money and spend it, then,
Mhm.
guess what? If you can't market your house as an ATM, it's just a house, maybe it'll appreciate like a house should.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about your example from a couple pods ago about your in Boston that is just like been, straight
Yeah,
line up. Yeah.
totally.
How else can we predict the future here at the end of the year?
Well, one thing we could do is to say the United Kingdom's in for a bad time. I
Yeah.
mean, we remember your earlier pods, we used to do the Brexit saga. What's the
Yeah.
latest on Brexit? All the rest of it. Well, I mean, it's all come to a head now. I mean, the whole country's on strike. The FT published a guide. It was a table for the month of December. Just everybody, border force out, nurses out, driving instructors who are public employees, bizarrely, out, all the sort of stuff. Everybody's on strike. You've got a real cost of living crisis. There's a piece in the New York Times that somebody sent me today. I don't have a sub, so they had to gift me the articles. I go read it. But it's about Scotland, and it's about a place that I'm familiar with in Glasgow called Easterhouse, which has always been a very poor, marginalised part of Glasgow. And now they say that, like, the estimate was that if fuel poverty is defined as at least 10% of your post-tax income
Yeah.
spent on fuel and heating, 61% of Scotland will be in fuel poverty by early next year.
That's incredible.
And Scotland's not one of the poorest parts of the United Kingdom. I
Yeah.
mean, there are places much worse off. London is not, but go north of London, you'll find incredible deprivation.
Right.
So, we've been saying this for a while, but they are in a bad place. And the tragedy is, whether it's the Conservatives or Labour, none of them seem to have any idea about what to do about it. They just
Yeah.
seem utterly bereft of ideas.
Yeah. And it's just thinking that the FT is so conservative to be publishing this, all of the places and all of the employees are on strike, just really also.
And the thing this time, like, back, the Conservative Party are old Thatcher's children, and they can never escape her shadow. And, back in the day, Thatcher was able to capitalize on popular resentment of the unions, abusing their position, and, get inflationary wage claims, and you could make that claim stick of a wage price spiral, whatever. Nobody's believing that this time. Basically, the Conservative Party's turned into like your angry auntie who now hates everybody. And it's like this list every day of who's against them.
Right.
Well, it's the immigrants, and it's the EU, and it's the workers, and it's the public sector workers, the nurses, those horrible nurses, right? And it's just like this huge pile of like grievance. And it's like, you don't govern by grievance.
Yeah.
It's just awful. Stop it.
Yeah. Well, and especially, I mean, given I don't even know if we're coming out of COVID and all of the different, I mean, like essential workers, you think it's really hard to bag on them, but I guess.
Oh, that's a bad one, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you're basically going after the nurses, who basically are doing the most stressful and important job for 27,000 quid a year.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, really?
Yeah. Beat up on puppies.
Yeah. So let's predict the future. In closing, let's do it. Let's go for 23 and we can be held accountable. You go first.
Yes. So I had two things, and that is about the Supreme Court, which we haven't talked about in a while. So this month, I think right after Thanksgiving, they heard a case called 303 Creative. And that is a woman who hasn't actually gotten a job to do this, but doesn't want to create websites for same-sex couples, and is worried that if she was asked, she would cite religious reasons that this would be a lawsuit. So she proactively went and settled or created her own lawsuit. So the court heard this, and my prediction on this is that even though Biden, the House and the Senate, and Biden just signed the Respect for Marriage Act, which then codifies same-sex and interracial marriage, that the court is going to take, not to overturn Obergefell or overturn the Respect for Marriage Act, but do an incremental sort of thing where it's like, well, you can get married, but you can't have access to a minister. You can't have access to a religious house of worship. You can't have a website. We're not going to bake you a cake. You're not going to be able to do a reception hall. And so it will just be little, the little drip sort of stuff stuff that this court will allow to happen. So that's my one prediction. The other big case, and we talked a little bit about this, was the affirmative action case, the Harvard and the
Yeah,
UNC
what's
Chapel
happening with
Hill.
that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a interesting set of arguments. I think these two, which are, the big cases, we probably won't know the decisions until June. But I mean, I think it's fairly clear that that's a 6-3, no more affirmative action in higher ed admissions. So those would be my two predictions about the Supreme Court. And then the other thing I would say, I guess I already said this, is that I do think that there's probably a court, well, in the new year, the Republicans will seek to impeach the president.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So happy holidays.
Things. Happy holidays. That's not bad. What's mine? We will all die in nuclear flame. No, we're not going to. That's fine. What will happen is, all right, 3 things. Number 1, everyone will get sick to death of Harry and Meghan. Okay, that's already happened. Right, we're good. That's it. So my first prediction is guaranteed. All right, what else? I think that we're not going to see the back end of this inflation problem. I don't think we're going to see. I think we're going to get to that world whereby having 4 to 5% inflation is normal. And we're just going to have to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And with occasional spikes pushing it that way, right? In terms of sort of, how this works out, I think that this winter is going to be really, really tough politically in Europe and particularly in the UK. And this is, again, populist ferment coming from a different direction. Not sure how that one's going to play out. The one thing we know is the governing Conservative Party are dead. They are completely done. It's a question of what Labour do with that. And that's kind of replicated throughout Europe in the sense that if this is a really, really tough winter for millions of people, then, yeah, the incumbents are going to get voted out.
Yeah.
But do the alternative actually have a clue?
Yeah.
Do they have some kind of idea about what to do with it? And to me, that's even more scary. That if to take Labour as the example, in 2 years from now, they finally take power and they don't really do anything with it, and then they're out again after 5 years, then that's really kind of, what's the point of the system if the system is unable to respond type stuff. So, we'll see where we're going with that one. Where else? What else is going on? I think 23, I don't know, it's a hard to see the future is. I mean, I think that our authoritarians that we were talking about are basically going to just double down on being authoritarians, and it's a question of whether they're able to just completely suppress millions, if not hundreds of millions of people as a permanent business model, or whether something cracks, right? Can Russia really just sustain this? Or is there a moment where Putin basically, is either falls or is pushed? They would be the ones. But the one thing I do want to highlight that we haven't, and that was, something kind of monumental, we hope, was the whole nuclear fusion moment of about a week ago, whereby, yes, you didn't account for the fact that you had to use all this electricity to power the lasers, but once you shot the lasers, you got more out than you put in, right? So this proves that it can be done, and therefore it is really just, and I say just with great respect, just an engineering challenge to basically stabilize and then move this along. You've got the European, they don't work on ignitions. ITAR in Europe's a very different thing. They've been building this thing for years, but they can use the information from this and the technologies that follow from this to make ITAR even more of a challenge. So the attempt to build one of these things at scale. And at the end of the day, what we've learned this year is that when the wind doesn't blow, which happens sometimes, and when it's really, really cold, right, and you live in Northern Europe, renewables ain't going to help. So we do have a kind of carbon dependency, which is why oil prices went up and we have a fuel crisis and all this sort of stuff, right? But, just long term, it's never going to be there in my lifetime, probably. And I hope to live a very long one. But nonetheless, if 20 years from now you begin to really see the first kind of like fusion generation, I mean, that would be brilliant. That would solve so many things. It would be utterly transformative. So I think rather than, getting bogged down in sort of all the bad stuff that might happen next year, let's elevate our gaze to a broader horizon.
Oh, I like that. Elevate your gaze to a broad. That's really, I feel like that should definitely be one of the posters with the sunrise on it. But
one of those inspiration cards.
Yes.
The one where it says winners, people who never quit, that kind of shit.
I just wanted to double back on your point about the if Labor gets voted in and they don't do anything, and it's clear that Tories don't have a plan, I think this is what I was trying to get at with House Republicans, but couldn't get there, is that
Yeah,
they don't have
exactly.
a
It's very
plan.
similar, right? There is no plan.
Yeah.
The plan is to disrupt. The plan is to own the libs.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
That's the plan, right?
Yep.
So once you've kind of won the social media battle of owning the libs, what happens next?
Yeah. Yeah. And we're healthcare, all this stuff, but there's no plan. We'll impeach, we'll go after the woke snowflakes, and then hopefully there'll be
There
another
is
election.
one place where they have a plan, and you're really beginning to see it. I've mentioned this before, is the kind of fatwa that has been declared on ESG investments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So they're really stepping this up now, and they've made Vanguard, one of the big firms, leave the Net Zero Alliance, etc.
Yeah.
And they're politicizing this and really going against it. And partly it's sort of, the economic self-interest of the carbon-dependent states, but it is also just this kind of like the next stage of climate change denial.
Yeah.
Is not to deny climate change, but to say that these metrics don't work and they're really socialism.
Right.
Which is what they're doing. So in 23, we can look forward to the fatwa really, really getting into gear on ESG.
I don't know how to turn this, but I have to say something about Harry and Meghan, because like the glutton that I am, I've watched all 6 hours of that thing.
That was so when my prior comment there, I haven't seen it. I was just trying to trigger you.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I
trying to
was
get-
yeah,
yeah.
here I am. Yeah. Here's my big takeaway is I think William and Kate are like cold robots, and Harry and Meghan are just kind of annoying. I mean, they're kind of boring and annoying. And I just like, so you can kind of see what the breakdown is like. Okay, what do you want? Like, you guys are just annoying, and we're just going to be our cold robots, and just do what we're programmed to do. And I think that's
Right.
like the breakdown. But I kind of think Harry and Meghan, they're just kind of, I mean, which is the worst thing for me is that you're kind of boring. I mean, that there's
Right.
not, it could have been like an hour and a half, 6 hours boiled down to like an hour and a half.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is why I didn't even watch the hour and a half. I was just relying on triggering you for you to give me the summary. So now
There you go.
that.
That's the summary.
So I guess that's it. I guess this is, believe it or not, folks, this was the Christmas special. Happy Christmas.
Yeah.
What else? I think that's it. I think we're done, yeah?
Yeah, I think
For now,
well, I mean,
till the next year beckons.
yes, it was always, as always, it's been so much fun to do this. Hopefully we'll have some optimistic sunrise type thing to talk about.
We will keep our eyes on a broader horizon,
Yeah.
Carrie. That's what we will do.
Yes, I like that a lot.
We'll elevate ourselves.
Yes. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.